All right, today is January 31st, last day of January. This is a meeting to check in on active development tasks for Backdrop CMS. Before we jump into core, I wanted to thank IAT for porting the IMCE rename module. So we've got some new people in our contrib queue working on ports. So thanks for that, and we will work on making you part of Backdrop contrib group. Also, since last week, we've got two new contrib projects, PhotoSwipe, which is integration with a JavaScript library, and web form registration. So thanks everybody for working on contributed modules, themes, and layouts. I appreciate that. For website, backdropcms.org stuff, we covered a lot of issues in the design and usability meeting earlier this morning. So if you're curious about what we talked about there, particularly around modules, themes, and layouts pages, and the demo button. You can go ahead and watch the video from an hour ago. Get a little update there. And then our translation site, Olaf said he wasn't going to make the meeting today, but he also mentioned that he was going to start working on the localization server. I think when he left this message, it was yesterday. So that's actually today. So he's going to be doing testing with language files and try and figure out what we need to do next, which is exciting. All right, Backdrop CMS itself. We have a handful of bugs with fixes that are ready for 1.12.2, and that includes a change to the GitHub system that prevents the module installer from installing modules properly, and a whole bunch of right-to-left issues where if you change to a different language, the CSS wasn't working quite right in Basis and 7, and we've got a bunch of those that are RTBC, and those will go in soon. Stuff that needs review, we have a core update issue where if you have a test file that's missing a type line, it throws an error and won't run an update, which is unfortunate because we just enabled the ability for you to do core updates. So we've got a fix in the works for that one. And then we also have an issue with the CSS grid we added for views grids, where if you had previously themed a views grid item that had a structured array syntax, and then you updated to the latest version of Backdrop, the structured array syntax is gone, because the view is assuming you're using a CSS grid and not the old table style grid. So the theming will break on any site that's updated. There's a fix there that includes an update hook that will sort of check the box that says use legacy tables for any old views. But I tested that once on one of my sites and it didn't work. I tested on a second site and it did work. So I need to figure out what the theming changes are that would cause it to work and what they are that would cause it to not work. I've got that for my list today to figure that out, because I would love to get these fixes in and get a release of Backdrop out that has all the other fixes in it. And this one's a pretty big one, so I want to get that in there too. So I promise to do that testing today. And let's see, other things. There's one more thing on the 1.12.2 issue, and that is getting predefined color schemes into Basis. This one is not super urgent, but it would be great if we could get it in. The only thing that's remaining for that issue is for someone to find a website that does a contrast check and check that our colors are high enough contrast that everyone will be able to see them in our default palettes. So I think I had a link to one from a long time ago. I could dig it up. I'll throw it in the issue queue if I can find it. But if anyone does accessibility work and knows about that resource and could do that color checking, that would be fantastic. And then issues for 1.13, we have dashboard module, which is coming along really nicely. It has a pull request that could use review. We're also looking for feedback from people as to what really useful dashboard items might be. We're currently working off of what was provided in the Total Control contrib module for Drupal. We're also looking at some of the blocks that were provided in Drupal core, but I think it would also be good to hear from people who use other tools like WordPress and Joomla and mention what they really appreciate about having on those dashboards, and make sure that we cover sort of, you know, what is it you always wanted on your dashboard that hasn't yet been done in Drupal or Backdrop. Then we also have the next step for translating config files. This is issue 3455. in the last version of Backdrop, we included the ability to translate config files. Now we just need to go through those config files and identify which strings should be translated. So I don't know if this is going to be a tedious task or not. Somebody already has Backdrop admin interface translated. That probably would get us most of the way there. We are going to have to go through all of the config files and identify translatable strings. I wonder if there's a way we could automate that. Nah, we'll see. Anyway, that's what comes next. And then other major things for 1.13, we have package signing. So this is something that I think we need to get done in conjunction with automatic updates. It would be great if we could get it done sooner. It's just sort of an extra security measure to make sure that the package that your site is installing is the package that Backdrop CMS.org delivered, so that it prevents something from getting in the middle and swapping out your code with something else that might be malicious. So most of the times it's not a huge risk, but I think having as much security in there as possible is going to be good before we get the automatic updates happening for people. And then let's see, that's all I had for Backdrop Core. Gregory, you're here now. We did talk about in the design and usability meeting this morning, I tried to summarize your issues on user role confusion, specifically coming from the usability studies that were done in Drupal 7 and potential recommended fixes to that. I don't know if you want to add anything. I know you weren't available earlier today, but I don't know if there's anything you want to specifically champion behind those before we move on to general discussion items.
Yeah, not anything specific. It's just so far I've identified four sub-issues. I've created that meta. And one of them is a very interesting idea, but it does sound like a 2.0 thing because it's quite a bit of a change. And that's 3510, that's the respective issue, which aims to remove the hard-coded anonymous and authenticated user roles. There's a discussion in d.org. I've read through it, and it does make sense from a UX point. It's sort of like, see how we have the ability now to specify an administrator role, which role is the administrator. It's something similar to that for anonymous and authenticated user roles. And there is already a patch, some work that has been done for Drupal. I need to test that and see, like, from reading the summary, it did make a lot of sense. Now I need to sort of like actually use it and see if it also sort of like improves the experience. Then there was a smaller issue that can go as a bug fix, the 3511, which is mainly about labels. We already have a setting for anonymous users. We call them, but we had called the specific labels for checkboxes and radius, and also the header of the column for permissions. So we ask the admin how they want to call the anonymous users on the site, but then we keep using the word anonymous.
Those are two different settings, though, and I think we need to just change the language on the checkbox so that people don't think they're the same thing. So one of them is the name for the role, which is something that's only shown to administrators on the site anytime you're managing the role. And the other one is the actual username. So it'll show up in a comment where it says, like, posted by blank. And so that is something that is shown to everybody who's looking at a note or a comment or anything that's created that has that submitted by a line in it. And so usually what you're showing people on your site you care about, like anyone who's visiting your site might care about that word saying anonymous, but you don't necessarily care about the user role name on the back matching the thing that's on the front. So one is like the actual like username versus the role name. And so I think we just need to figure out a way to make that distinction clear to people on the back end. And that's why the username is in like collapsed field set, which is like most of the time people aren't ever going to want to change this thing, so we're going to bury it somewhere. But yeah, I think the fact that that can be confused is a problem.
It's actually,
we need to figure out how to like.
I'm a seasoned user, but because all of the sites that I built do not have comments enabled, now that you mentioned it, it makes sense to me. But still, it was confusing. So I thought that the setting was actually for the admin interface, wherever we mentioned that role. But yes, it does make sense.
The
Yeah.
label obviously isn't correct though,
Yeah.
if it's something that's, you know, that easy to confuse. So we should figure out how to clean that up.
Yeah. Which, by the way, if we end up implementing, or Drupal ends up implementing what is being discussed on 3510, which is remove the hard-coded anonymous and authenticated user roles, and because the main argument behind it was that these things are states and not roles, and they can be sort of like assigned to people by things triggered, like whether their user has logged in or not. It's sort of like being flags, so to say.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's an interesting discussion. And then other than that, other than the UX around roles, there's an RT. So we had a lot of RTL issues, and we fixed quite a few of them. Most of them were sort of like cosmetic. There was one that was annoying. It was preventing users from clicking the third level menus in admin menu, and we fixed that because they were overlapping with the second level menu. Now there's another one that I originally thought that we have broken by the CK editor update, which actually does not allow users to set up their CK editor toolbar, and that's issue 3504. And I tried to troubleshoot it, but I didn't get very far. It turns out that that the code that is responsible, the logic that is responsible for rendering those icons is in CK editor module. And I did try to see if it has to do with file names and hence the paths that get rendered, but it doesn't have to do with that specifically, because some of the icons do get rendered, others don't. Anyways, but it is quite annoying. It's good that we have at least one user that is extensively using RTL now, because they report such issues. But yeah. Other than that, nothing else comes to mind.
Okay. Yeah, that CK editor issue might be tricky. That's something that we might have to like fix in our copy of CK editor, and then also file an upstream fix for it. And then every time we update CK editor, we'll have to check and see if they've fixed it.
Yeah.
We should remove our fix.
Well, it turns out that it's not the library that's broken the things. I think that this exists in previous versions of Backdrop, like in, sorry, in 1.11 before the update.
Does it happen in CK editor outside of Backdrop?
It's not CK editor, the toolbar. It gets rendered. It's the CK editor configuration, like the module.
Okay.
See how you can rearrange the toolbar buttons? Yeah, that's what's broken.
Okay.
So people can still use CK editor on RTL languages, but they cannot configure or yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's annoying.
Yeah.
Okay, but at least it's us and we can fix it. So
I tried a couple of things, but it didn't fix it. But
yeah, I don't know how that page is put together. It might be tricky because of all the JavaScript in there, but maybe we can get
the logic that picks up the names, because the file names of the actual icons, if we have some of them that are specifically RTL, so they have a -RTL on the name. So the logic is PHP, is not JavaScript. But I just couldn't put my finger on it where the logic was going wrong.
Okay.
Because we have RTL, and then we have I don't know, like there's not a lot of comments, like code comments in that specific section of the code. So there's an alternative, -alternative, and I don't know what these are for, like the icons. So you have the regular icons, regular -RTL, then alternative, and then alternative -RTL. So I don't know what alternative is being used for.
I don't know either.
Okay. Nate might have more.
Which issue was that one? The CK editor one?
3504.
3504. Okay, I'll take a look at that and see.
Yeah. I might have some time as well over the weekend to go through some issues.
Okay. And then I was hoping we could get another bug fix release out soon, 1.12.2. But we'll have to talk to Nate or Jeff or Herb and see what their availability is like. I would love to get some of these issues at least marked RTBC and potentially merged, even if we can't get a release out, so that people who are having problems can download like the latest version of 1.x and still have fixes to them. So I'm going to work on some of these issues today and hopefully make it easier on whoever to come and help test and merge and get a release out. Okay, so general discussion today. Gregory and I a little bit earlier talked about like this version in particular. We put in a lot of great stuff. We had a lot of major improvements, but there are also a couple of bugs that we missed somehow in our testing before the release. And so now there are bugs we're trying to fix in the post-release before we push the code to Pantheon and make everybody update, and before we send the newsletter to tell everybody about, like, hey, look at Backdrop, because we don't want them to see anything that's broken. And in a perfect world, we would push the update, go a week, not have anything wrong, and then be able to do all of these things right away. And so I would love to come up with a way that we can have that release cycle, not have anything go wrong. And I don't think that it's possible to do 100% nothing wrong all the time. But I would love to get closer than we did this particular release. And I don't really know how to do that, because the more improvements we put in, the more changes we're going to make, the more likely we're going to cause something to not work correctly. And the one thought that I had is that if we could do a release on the 1st that was a preview release before we did the official release on the 15th, then we could have everybody update to the preview, everybody who wanted to update to the preview release and do pretty thorough testing on that. And I think that might be a much easier way to ask people to test it than asking them to update to the latest version from GitHub. If we could have a packaged version, I think that would be much better. At least I know from my experience, it's really easy for me to download a package and update a site. But if I have to like go check it out, copy it over, it seems like more work, even though it might not actually be more work. And I think it would make I know I only updated 2 of my sites to the latest version before the release came out. And I think I would like to encourage myself to do more. And I think having a release would make that easier. So I'm wondering if other people are feeling the same way. And that was one idea you came up with. And then another one is just, Gregory mentioned better test coverage, particularly in JavaScript. This is something that Drupal doesn't have JavaScript testing for Drupal 7 either. It's something that we've known for a long time would be really great to have, but we don't have it set up. But maybe on GitHub, there is already solutions out there that would enable us to do better JavaScript testing, or any JavaScript testing for Backdrop. And we should do some more research today into where we are, because then we looked at it 4 years ago when Backdrop first came out and said, oh, it's still hard. But I'm not sure we've done an exhaustive search of other possible JavaScript testing solutions and what it might mean for Backdrop to set those up. But I think that might also help. I'm not sure how many of the issues we had recently were JavaScript related, but it is something that's been on my mind as well, that more testing is generally good.
One of the tools that we use in our agency quite extensively is a visual regression tool, and it does allow you to authenticate. So we can visually test the backend, see, for example, that CK editor left to right issue that came up could have been picked up. And I think that there are some solutions out there that are sponsoring open source projects that we could use. Maybe they don't offer like they limit the amount of screenshots or processes, and it might take a long time, but at least we could run it once before the release or something like that.
Yeah, good idea.
That's another idea that we could explore. One related issue that came up is see how some people realized that these issues were existing for 1.12. And they held back. So they updated to the security release for 1.11, but then their site kept complaining that there's a security update, which is a similar issue to what's happening with D8 now with semantic versioning. And the way that releases work in D8 now, so they release security updates for the current minor release, but then they also backport it to the previous minor. And there's a lot of sites that do not quite update, but even if they update to the minor, the previous minor, they still the site still contains that there's security updates available. So I'm not sure if it's going to be an easy one to solve.
Is Drupal 8 working on it right now?
Sorry?
Is there an issue for Drupal 8 where they're working on this right now? This might be a place where we can collaborate.
Yeah, that was I didn't think of that.
Okay.
So I didn't search for any such issue. I'll see if there's something up.
I have a feeling this is, not a new problem that people haven't thought about before. But yeah, I mean, I think what we're doing right now is we're just polling like, hey, what's the latest secure version? And then we compare the numbers and we're like, is this number bigger than that number? Yes, no. But there's probably we could say like, what are all the latest versions? And then what is the version you have? And do a little smarter checking on the like, okay, well, these two versions are secure, but the other one's not. But yeah.
Yeah, but we need to make an assumption and then a policy as well that we are always backporting security releases to the previous minor, which is not always the case. If we make a policy of that, at least for the previous minor, then we can base the logic off of that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think we had talked before about doing 2 previous minors, so it would cover a year. And I would give everybody a year to update to the latest version, which I think is a little more realistic since our minors come out every 4 months. It might be useful to give people more time.
Okay. Should I? We don't have a ticket for that. Should I open a ticket for that? And would the general backdrop issues queue be?
I think we need to, for setting the policy, we should open an issue in the PMC queue that's like, hey, we need to sign. And there might already be an issue. This sounds familiar, but I don't know if there's an issue or not for this already. Just so that we can state it, and then we need to figure out where we write the policy. So then we would need an issue on backdropcms.org queue that's like, write the policy somewhere where people can see it. And then we should have a core issue. I think we might already have a core issue about the nag screen. And then we should just make sure that it matches what our policy is.
I think that the main pushback was that from the core committers, it's just more work.
Yeah, although most of our security fixes are not actually that much more work.
Yeah.
All right. I've got to run.
Okay.
But let's wrap this meeting and we'll chat about this more in the issue.
Yep. All right, cool.
Bye.
Bye.